Hello, this is Frank Patty, and this is the new conservative voice, and we're going to wrap up the year. And my co-host, is sitting next to me. I don't know who he is. Who are you?
Next to you, about 5 miles away, George the Eight, and where Frank and I are making wisdom great again. And there's no Operation Mockingbird here at the new conservative voice.
Okay, we're going to have the Star Spangled Banner as we always do. Okay, we're back, and I'm just gonna go over a couple of things with you. We advertise tunnels to towers all the time. The Wounded Warriors, DAV. Those are all great organizations for you to contribute to. I personally, we send a tunnel to towers. We send our money in. We have a every month. There's a deduction from our checks and go over to them, and they're great. Those are the warriors. Those are the men and women who fought for this country, and we have to take care of them. Okay, Sailor. Sailor, freedom fights human trafficking. As we had the young lady on the show who explained completely what Sailor was and taking care of women that were trafficked in this horrible, horrible kidnapping that they do and put them into prostitution and so on. How they ever get over it is beyond me. But Sailor works with them for their physical health and their mental health, and it's really good. And George and I have contributed to it. So after that speech that she gave, and we know Sailor is a good organization. The next one is near and dear to my heart, and my wife and I always contribute to it, is our mother's house. Our mother's house takes care of the women who decided to have their baby. They take care of them for 2 years. They give them a place to live, food, shelter. They help them get on their feet, and they take care of them and the woman and the baby. And it's a wonderful organization. You can go to Post Office Box 2240, Venice, Florida 34284, and make a contribution online. It is very good. It's a great organization. It's part of the Catholic Charities, but they don't ask the woman what the religion she is. They only want to know that she saved her baby and saved the life. That's the main thing that's important on it too. I'm not going to go through all the things I warned you about. Getting your eyes checked, your ears checked, going for your checkups. You older guys, look, George is only a kid when he does a lot of this stuff. Mentally, maybe even less than that, but we're not sure. But you should do those things. Those are very important for you to do, and we want to encourage that too. And sleep apnea, as I said last time, I took the home test for it, and it was so easy, and got the results back for that too. So then let's talk about for a moment what we're doing with the year. It's been a very eventful year, and we're going to discuss it with one of the people that knows more about this and politics than anybody I know. George, you want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, Frank, before I get in, I just kind of want to give a recap again as to who, what, when, where, and why. Let's take a quick rundown before we introduce our guest, and see. We're going to look back on 24. Let's take a look back on 24. In 24, DEI is dead. The gun control issue is dead. Recreational abortion is dead. The mainstream media is dead. Movie star power is dead. Globalism is dead. The death of the celebrity cult is dead. The party of Jim Crow and Robert Byrd is dead. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Jamie Miller from Reasonable Arguments. Jamie, as soon as I get you back up here where you should belong, there you go. Welcome to the New Conservative Voice. One more time, Jamie.
Hey, I've appeared more on the New Conservative Voice than any other podcast in 2024. So thank you for having me so many times. And I don't know if you guys know this, but I appeared on more than 50 this election cycle all across the country, including every single swing state. So I was on. Now, some of those were small podcasts and some of them were nationally renowned. Not quite Joe Rogan, but I haven't cracked the top 50, but I am happy to say that it looks like the first week of January I'm going to be on Montel Williams as well, his podcast.
Wow, that's great.
So we're making a lot of progress. He has a podcast about weed, and so we're going to review kind of Amendment 3. Was it 3? That was the recreational pot amendment in Florida, and what organizers for that would have to do to try to take another bite at the apple if they so choose.
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, as long as we're talking about the pot issue, let me throw this in there. The more people are educated on the issue, the more it's going to go down. They were really inundated with the pros of the marijuana, and only the very last bit was the cons. When we had Sheriff Hoffman on with that particular issue, he would be a good resource to go to because he knows the who, what, when, where, and whys. And
he
also
and I sat on a panel in South Sarasota County, Tiger Bay. So I'm actually familiar with his speech.
Perfect. Okay. So Frank, take it away here. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did mean to interrupt.
Oh, what do you call it? The more you know about marijuana, and my dealings with it, no, I haven't taken it. I wouldn't let it take it. When you have children also, you know what you do, they will do. And I raised 2 sons, and they never took it either. They went to Phoenix House with me, and they saw the results of it. The idea that it is not addictive is complete baloney. We had to get kids down to Phoenix House. They needed 3 joints a day to function. If it was mentally on that, it may have been physically. Now they claim it is physically addictive. It can destroy brain cells. They're coming out with more and more on this thing. And also you take away the weapon that the police have when they catch some of these drug runners, and cartels. They've got the marijuana. They can arrest them for that and then check all the other stuff they have. So you're taking a weapon away from the police for the ones we're trying to stop. What? To get a little high in the car so you can smash your car up somewhere? Come on. We don't need more trouble in cars either. You got enough without jerks who are drinking and driving. I'm sorry. That is ridiculous. You have people being killed that way. So that's my take on it. I'm totally against it, and I will fight it as I did in Long Island. I was on the committees, and we fought very hard to stop selling paraphernalia to kids. We went on. Just one woman and myself. We won, and we fought every way down, and was shot down. They shut down. Them selling paraphernalia to children, which was horrible. And also, we fought, to stop the marijuana. And I will always continue to fight to stop drugs, or the legalization of drugs. I'm sorry. I don't think it solves any problems at all. It only creates more and makes it cheaper for the cartels to get it over here and sell it. Jamie, over to you.
Yeah, so I oppose it. I, in fact, had a debate at USF with our state senator and who supported this amendment. I thought there were some things. I've been a long term advocate for the decriminalization. The last time I really kind of wrote about it was 2017 or 2019, where we had about 4,000 people in Florida's prisons at the tune of $30,000 per year for people holding less than 4 grams of pot, which is, personal use. And most of this, like you said, Frank, some of it is folks who are on parole and, they revoke their parole over this personal use marijuana. But the average sentence that those 3,000 people were serving at the time was about 3.5 years. So, I just feel like that's probably not a great use of taxpayers' dollars in, the criminalization of weed. But I kind of agree with you that when you legalize it, one of the arguments that I had with the state senator is like, well, if we legalize it, it'll be safer for kids. I'm like, how's it safer for kids if it's still going to be illegal for kids? And so I just felt like that was a hypocritical argument. And that particular amendment, where you have, you're going to, quote, legalize something, but not let the consumer grow their own. Publix doesn't come have me arrested for growing my own tomatoes. So I just thought there were 4 or 5 issues with this particular amendment that were extremely bad. And quite frankly, I would probably personally oppose it, but depending on what they came up with. But, the discussion I think I'll have with Montel Williams and others is, more the political side of it, of, kind of what George said. Do people really vote more the more they know about it, or do they, accept it more if it has, kind of a broader application than this particular amendment? I'm not sure. I haven't seen polling on that particular issue. So I think there are probably some ways that, should they take another bite at the apple, that it's in a non-presidential year, that it's more likely to pass than not. But the devil is in the details, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah. So
I know Pam
go ahead,
Bondi's against. Yeah, I had a talk with Pam Bondi quite a number of years ago, and she was totally against it. And she came over to me when she heard I worked with Phoenix House, and we spoke about it. And she's totally against it. So I can see her fighting against it in case it's up again. Go ahead, George.
We hardly could have a recap on 2024 without talking about Pam Bondi and others from Florida who are joining the Trump administration.
That was just, you're reading my mind.
You're going right into a good point. Yes.
Yeah. Now let's get into, okay, 2024 is just a day. Actually, it was yesterday when this airs. Tell me your impression of your macro impression of what happened in 2024.
Yeah.
Well, I think you touched on it, George, to begin the show, saying that all these things were dead. There's certainly people rejected things like boys in girls' bathrooms, boys in girls' sports, and men in women's prisons. They certainly rejected the weaponization of our federal departments using our tax dollars to take out political opponents. Certainly enough people had enough information about Donald Trump and the political persecutions and prosecutions of Donald Trump that they said that we are the jury and we vote not guilty. And a vast majority of people did that across our country. Not only did he win a pretty significant electoral college victory, but a popular vote victory as well. If it wasn't for California counting votes for 30 days after the election, he would have had more than 50% of the popular vote. And it seems like a small thing that they would do just to try to make a point to get him below 50%, but they did it, and took 2 congressional seats along with them. And, so there's still some things that we have to do as a society to create an environment where we have free, fair, and transparent elections. Every state does not have them, like Florida. I think what we're seeing, why we're seeing so many people from Florida being tapped for the Trump administration, is not only that Trump is here in Palm Beach, Florida, the first Floridian to be elected president. But we've had a foundation of 25 years of conservative politics in Florida. Since 1998, we've held the governor's mansion, the state house, and state senate. And for several of those years, we've had a supermajority in the state house and state senate, like we have going into 2025. And so we're very fortunate in Florida. And so if Florida is the proving ground for conservatism, it has been proven right. I wrote in my blog, Reasonable Arguments, that you can get on Substack. Even the Biden inflation numbers and the economic numbers that Biden was claiming were positive, were, as a general rule, they were positive economic numbers from Florida and Texas that were far outscaling blue states like New York, Illinois, and California. Those are 5 of the largest economies in the world. If you were to look at them separately, 5 of the top, I think, 30 economies in the world, if you looked at each one of them individually. And you have these 2 conservative economies vastly outperforming blue state economies by 1.5-2% gross domestic product in both Florida and Texas. And that's because we've reduced regulation, we've reduced taxes, we've allowed people to allowed the business spirit of our country to thrive in places like Florida and Texas, where in New York and California, Illinois specifically, they do just the opposite. And it shows in the numbers. And so even when Biden was touting like, oh, the economy's coming back, it really wasn't. The economy wasn't coming back in blue states. It was kind of coming back in red states.
No, you're right. You're 100% right. The economics of Biden were fantasies. They were total fantasies. It wasn't going anywhere. The Federal Reserve doesn't help. I'm sorry. They don't know what they're doing 3/4 of the time. And monetary policy always lags. They always do it after the damage is done, trying to stop the damage, instead of planning ahead and saying, how can we do this to stop it now before it starts? But when you got a Federal Reserve like that, and you got a president like Biden who understands nothing about economics, I mean, Bidenomics is a joke. It could be a cartoon character. You got to be kidding me.
You tap dance around it, Frank, but your point is well taken that, Biden had monetary policy while Trump had economic policy, with monetary policy as a tool, right? So the monetary policy should not be your economic policy. Your economic policy should include, a thriving energy sector, lower taxes, thriving businesses, those types of things, where Democrats completely try to control the economy through the manipulation of interest rates and the manipulation of interest rates alone. And that one, while that's a tool in economic policy, it can't be economic policy alone. And that's the failure of Democrats.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And they're supposed to work in the same direction. That fiscal policy, and monetary policy is supposed to be working the same direction. They remind you of that picture of Lucy and what's his name, Charlie Brown. She's pushing this way and he's pushing that way on the car. That's exactly what we do. I mean, one thing is, the Democrats love one thing. They love printing presses. They can keep pumping out money. I actually heard one of them turn around and say, well, that's no problem. We're over. We can print the money. And I sat there and I said, are you an idiot? And this was an economist who said this thing. You can always print the money.
Well, AOC argues, well, let's just print a $1 trillion coin. And I'm like, well, hell, why don't we print 30 and get completely out of debt? Like it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Exactly. I want to touch on this lawfare just a little bit and tell you that what I plan to do to be proactive on this lawfare. New York State took a misdemeanor, charged Trump with a felony, and got a conviction on it. The prosecutor and the judge did not dismiss the case. What they've done is they have delayed sentencing. And that's code for we're going to delay sentencing until he's out of office. We're going to, put him 200 years in jail is what he's looking at. So what I want to do is, and I hope you kind of join with me. I have 2 legislators already kind of semi working on it. I don't think it's high on their priority, but to write legislation or get the CFO of the state, and we're going to call it the Florida State Employees Safe Act, and cancel any and all contracts with the state of New York, with any company based in New York, cancel them all. And what that's going to do is 2 things. Number one, maybe companies are going to say, wait a minute, I like Florida. It's time we start moving some of our companies down to Florida where it's a freer state to work in. Number 2 is it's going to stop this lawfare. You're talking just within the state of Florida, $1 billion a year goes to companies based in New York. You cut that off, that's going to be the end of the so-called lawfare. And number 3, the biggest thing is precedence has already been set. So say somebody from FDOT makes a clerical error. Precedence has now been set where he can be brought up on felony charges in the state of New York. So what I'm getting a couple of legislators to do is to write legislation and ask the CFO of the state or do it legislatively to cancel any and all any and all business with any company based in the state of New York until this lawfare is finished. And so, give me your macro picture.
I would throw another one in there, George. I would say that if you can't count your votes within 72 hours, we shouldn't be doing business with them. A state like California, we should not be seating their members of Congress if they're taking 30 days to vote, or not to vote, to count their votes. Every other state in the union does it within a reasonable 48 hours, 72 hours. And California just sits there and counts for 30 days. And, those members of Congress should not be eligible to serve on committees, serve as chair of committees, regardless of their political party, and serve in leadership positions. It's we have to protect the integrity of our elections, and we're simply not doing it when we see a state like California just count votes until they get the intended result, which is Democrats winning those congressional seats. And it's unfortunate that we sit there. I know the RNC had their most vibrant and powerful election integrity program in the history of politics. And I think they did a great job. They probably saved Pennsylvania from being stolen right out from underneath us. And there probably weren't enough assets being spent. And, I get it. You have to win, and you have to win by putting your assets where they make the most sense. I always say that, one of the major reasons why we did so well in this presidential election, and quite frankly, some of these U.S. Senate seats, was Rick Scott here in Florida did not need an extra $50 or $100 million to save his seat from the National Republican Senate Committee. And that money was then spent in Ohio to topple a Democrat incumbent, and was spent in Pennsylvania to win the presidential race, and spent in other places. And we were very fortunate this election cycle to have the Democrats being mismanaged by Nikki Fried, which thankfully she's running for re-election of the Florida Democratic Party. So I hope she continues her successful run for the Florida Democrats, and because she managed the entire race by press release and failed miserably in results.
The one thing you're forgetting about California, and you really have to think about it, most people there, from what I've seen with the voting, can't get beyond count of 10. So it takes longer to count up the ballots, beyond 10. It must be, because this is so stupid. I can't believe it took them that long to count up ballots. So the only explanation is they can't get beyond 10. It takes 2 people to get beyond 10.
Well, Alaska, and there's a big push in America for this debacle and unconstitutional ranked choice voting that's supposed to save time and money. And it's we saw that in Alaska this time. So they took, I don't know, 5 or 6 days to figure out their congressional seat. And, so there's so many reasons to hold people's feet to the fire and say, hey, listen, your election results should be known, within a reasonable time period. And 30 days does not meet that. Does not meet the muster to say you conducted a free, fair, and transparent election.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw a name out there that you guys may not be familiar with, but his name is Dino Rossi. And Dino ran for governor from my former state of Washington, and he won election night. He won the first recount. And then all of a sudden in King County, which is Seattle, found a whole bunch more votes for his opponent. And then after that, we need to stop counting because we're wasting taxpayers' money. So he won twice governor election, but he was not elected because they found a whole bunch of votes. And with my election in 2002, I lost by 1,952 votes with 2,500 questionable ballots. So it's very, very obvious how this is happening. And that's exactly what happened in California. What Pam Bondi, when she becomes AG, she needs to file federal charges on these people that decided to do this. The election people that thumb their nose at law, the people that made the decisions to keep counting until they found the right amount of votes. This needs to be taken care of legislatively now, or criminally now. What, Frank?
No, in Florida, we have the safest system. The checks and balances are in there. It works completely, and everybody, and the count is there, after 7 o'clock. By 7 o'clock, you have to be reporting, start to report in. You'll get done about an hour later. By 8 o'clock, you're turning in your ballots. Everything has to tie out. I'll tell you this much. If every state, had that type that we have, Ron Turner had set up such a good system. And I have worked with the systems of this, of Sarasota and Florida here for about 17 to 18 years. And we are so good. I can't tell you. The people that work are well trained. They all go to classes. For a clerk, they put about 7 hours in classes. And what happens is they know what they're doing. And then the machines have to tie out to the EPBs, the electronic poll books. Everything has to tie out to the exact number of people. And they do review all this. Say, well, they should. It's paper. And they can review. And they do review going through all of it and test it. So there should be a national law. That is the system of the country. I don't know if it could ever be done, but it'd be sure a hell of a lot better than a lot of these states.
Let's make Ron Turner election czar to run these elections nation for federal elections. That would end a lot of it. And he does such a great job. I am so impressed with him, moving down here, getting to know him a little bit. I am so impressed with that man. I mean, there's 3 people that in elected office that I am so impressed with, far more than what I had. I
would love to see, and I don't know that the president has this planned, but I hope that he does. But I think a great place for Ron Turner would be to serve as the chair of an election integrity task force that works on behalf of the president of the United States. So, like I said, I haven't heard of anybody saying that's going to be the case. Number one, that he's going to have a task force. Number 2, that Ron Turner would lead it. But I think both of those things are grand ideas.
I think so too.
So, okay, let me throw something else. This happened in previous years, but I think Donald Trump's the first person who's going to be using these Supreme Court decisions. Number 1, the Chevron doctrine, and number 2, West Virginia v. EPA in 2022. And I believe that, the court decisions in Chevron basically handed back the power to the courts, and the EPA, West Virginia v. EPA, turned back power from these bureaucrats to the legislature. Give me your, I don't know if you've studied on it or not, but I believe this is what Vivek and Elon is going to be using, this power that now has been turned back over to the legislative branch and the executive branch and the judiciary branch to rein in some of these bureaucrats and some of these bureaucratic decisions. Do you have any input on that? Or
yeah, I think the Chevron doctrine was wrong, and I'm glad to see that it's kind of sunsetted a little bit. Like, there's no question that there's no place in the Constitution that a regulatory agency gets to break any type of tie. It's either the federal government or the states governments or citizens. Those are the three entities in the Constitution. So there's no question that the Chevron doctrine was wrong for allowing regulatory agencies to, if it's too ambiguous, it's whatever the regulatory agency says goes. I mean, that's been part of the problem with the IRS all these years. If there's no other leg to stand on, that what the IRS says goes. And that's not, that's just not the correct interpretation of the Constitution in any way, shape, or form. I'm not as familiar with the West Virginia case. Which one was it?
There were West Virginia v. EPA in 2022. Agencies and bureaucrats no longer able to make regulation that has financial impact. And all of this actually started under Woodrow Wilson. So now it's back to the legislative branch where it says you now are allowed to fine somebody at this particular address for having water in a mud puddle. So that's the kind of thing that EPA, this EPA versus West Virginia, and it goes all the way back to my favorite president that I hate, Woodrow Wilson, who was a professor type, and went back and said, "Oh, we need to rely on the experts," and that's where it all began. Was under Woodrow Wilson, who, by the way, segregated the military again. So now finally, they're actually what's happening. The biggest thing for me in 2024, and I'd love to have your reaction on this, is the power has gone back from the bureaucrats to the legislative branch, to the judicial branch, and the individual. What say you on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly number one. I think that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump had such a resounding victory is that Democrats went too far. It's, I saw a graph recently that showed, that since 2008, conservatives have barely moved to the right for the most part. They've stayed pretty much to the right. They bounced a little bit to the left around 2014, 15, and then bounced a little bit more to the right. But over the last 20 years, it's been pretty consistent. Independents bounced just barely to the left over that same 20-year period. But Democrats moved about 25 points to the left. And, over that same 20-year period. So it's Democrats who have become the extremists in our country. And Americans rejected that extremism. There's still a good number of people who did not like Donald Trump, didn't trust that he wouldn't weaponize federal government agencies and things like that. And the election, I think, could have gone, down ballot would have gone a little bit different. I think we would have had a larger U.S. U.S. Senate and U.S. House margins of majority if we probably had another Republican presidential candidate. But quite frankly, we maybe would have had a presidential candidate who didn't win. And so, you take kind of, you can't play woulda, coulda, shoulda. Donald Trump was our nominee. Donald Trump went out. We got out behind him and he won. We tried to win all these other U.S. Senate races. In most cases, Arizona, Nevada in particular, those two, and Wisconsin U.S. Senate seats should have come along and they didn't. And, that we can look at whether that was, because free, fair, and transparent elections didn't exist in those states, when it came to the down ballot races. And so there was a big mantra, too big to rig, at the top of the ticket. And I think that turned out to be the case, but it didn't turn out to be the case in some of those down ballot races for U.S. Senate and U.S. House. So we very well could have, who knows what would have happened. But we're fortunate that we have President Trump, because we have the ability, as you said, George, these U.S. Supreme Court cases take a long time to go through the system. We've been fighting lots of them for decades. And, now some of them are starting to turn back in our favor, not only because Donald Trump appointed justices in, his first term, but, the work that, Bush and some of the others have done over the years, appointing conservative U.S. Supreme Court justices. So, some of them fell flat along the way, but it's, we're getting a lot of 6-3. It's a lot of 6-3 votes at the U.S. Supreme Court level. So much so that Democrats really kind of ran on, we're going to pack the court if we get our way. So we're going to take the majority of the U.S. Supreme Court back through illegal means. Biden just vetoed a bill that would have allowed, more federal judges to be appointed over a 10-year period, a very big bipartisan bill that would have spread it out over, I think, 3 presidential administrations. And he vetoed it because he's like, well, I don't want Donald Trump to have a say in any of them. And so he's just spitting in the wind of any type of bipartisanship that existed in Washington, D.C., and wants to finish his campaign and his legacy with liberal extremism that was soundly rejected by the American people.
Yeah, I kind of want to get into this because Jamie and I are both number hacks. We love numbers, but all 50 states went to the political right this time, moved to the political right, to the point where New Jersey is on the borderline being a swing state. And even Guam and the Northern Marianas went more Republican than they ever have.
Well,
and that's because of what happened on Trump.
And every single demographic, no matter how you cut it,
right?
The only demographic, and they moved 2 points towards Harris, was college-educated white women, and it was solely based upon the abortion issue. Every other single demographic and subset of those demographics moved more towards Trump. Now, did he win on every single demographic? No. But, for instance, I like to use the stat in Georgia. He went from winning 10% of African-American men to 23%. So that's a huge difference. That's a huge movement to the right among African-American men in Georgia. And it was, solely because it had, I don't even want to say it had anything to do with Harris. It had to do with the rejection of these extremely liberal policies that have been jammed down our throat for the last 12 of the last 16 years since Barack Obama was first elected president. And that's what people forget. They're like, oh, this wasn't about Biden and Trump. It really was a rejection of Obama as well.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. People voted because people aren't stupid. And the Democrat Party keeps thinking they're stupid. If they tell black people we're better for you, and they don't produce anything, such as they haven't produced anything for them. Even under Obama, nothing went for them. But under Trump, he had zones and so on to help the black people get ahead. I think they knew that. And then the rest of the people going to stores, you tell them everything is wonderful. And they go to the shelf, they can't afford milk, they can't afford eggs. And they get up to their car, it's 3 times what it was when Trump was in office. And you got this old guy standing up there telling you everything's wonderful. No, there's no inflation. The public.
Well, I had an argument with a progressive podcaster. I won't use his name here because he's not here to defend himself. But I said that a box of Captain Crunch was $9.99. He's like, Jamie, that's just blasphemous. It's only $8.99. I was like, well, under Trump, you could get 2 boxes for $5. And so you like you can quibble about $8.99 versus $9.99. The problem here is that everything has more than doubled. And while you want to claim inflation came down, and technically it went from 9% to 3.5%. So yes, you said, oh, inflation is down, but it didn't change the value and the prices of products on the store shelves, like you said, Frank. And people who are struggling still are paying way too much for eggs and fresh fruit and vegetables and the things that they want to give their children to be healthy, right? It's a sad state of affairs when your fast food hamburger is the cheapest way to feed your children.
Yeah, and Trump was right. When Trump originally said there wouldn't have been a war in the Ukraine if I was in, I said to myself, come on, how would you stop? And then it hit me. I said, go back to economics. If we had our oil up there and we said the same as Trump had said, if you do business with Russia buying their oil, you don't do business with the United States. Most of the European countries would have liked to do business with the U.S. Not the Soviet Union, probably is yet. Russia had turned around and couldn't sell their oil. They wouldn't have had the money to attack. They'd be bankrupt by now. So Trump was right what he said. If we had cut Russia down economically, the shooting would have started. And that's a very good point.
Yeah, Frank, you make a good point. And George, to your point to begin the show, when you said the corporate media is dead, this is a perfect example. A week to 10 days before the election, 10,000 North Korean troops joined Russia in Ukraine, and we barely have heard about it. I saw one story that was 2 days after the election where they're like, oh, this North Korean soldier could get online and watch TikTok, and he's getting distracted by TikTok instead of going out and fighting. And, it's like he was committing treason for North Korea because he was watching TikTok. And so, but he had never been exposed to it before. That was the real story. And he was being exposed to it in Ukraine, fighting for Russia, and nobody connected the dots prior to the election, which is one reason why people don't trust. They're trusting shows like yours, Frank and George, much more than they're trusting corporate media.
I think George has made that point quite a number of times. Look, we're two old guys. We've been around. I mean, I've been around a hell of a long time. I remember.
Yes, you have.
Don't agree with me, George. George always likes to go to the negative. However, what I've seen over the years is heartbreaking. As I've come out before, I said after World War II, I remember the hope and the dreams of the people. War was over. I said there was this UN, which was going to be the start all and end all of wars because we could sit at a table and we could talk. The only rub was the Russians, and we weren't worried. And then the Russians, the announcement that an Iron Curtain had gone across Europe by Churchill when he spoke before Congress. And it started from that point down. We've always stood up for what we are. We had brave presidents, a lot of them, and some not so good. But Trump fights for the United States. People know that. I mean, aside from antics and some of the stuff, he fights for the United States. The Army and the armed services love him. They know he has their back, Even when
I've said on numerous shows, Frank, that President Trump will lead us through fire, and people voted for him despite the fires he sets. Going into 2020, people were like, oh, I don't like his tweets. We're going to go with Biden because he seems like a steady hand on the wheel. At that point, Biden was pretending to be a moderate, and they're like, and Trump just starts too many fires. And that was one reason why Trump lost in 2020. We could get into many, several others, including election integrity. But, the truth of the matter is in 2024, after 4 years of extreme liberalism, people decided, maybe Trump does set some fires, but by God, he leads us through, and we're going to go with the guy who leads us through fire.
You lost a lot of servicemen for the stupid vaccination, for COVID. You lost a lot of them. You lost pilots that it takes 3 years to train a good pilot, a fighter pilot, a bomber pilot. You lost mechanics. And all they had to do if they were disobeying was an Article 15 in their folder, and that would have been the end of it. But he picked the man there in Austin that was an idiot. The guy left his post. Any other guy would have gotten court-martialed for leaving your post without relief. I mean, you just look at the mess that was there. Now they wanted these guys to come back. They're earning big salaries with the airlines and all. They're not going to go back and put themselves on the line.
Yeah.
Well, in fact is, I mean, you bring up a good point that it takes 3 years to train an Air Force guy, but it takes 12 years to train an airline guy. So when they get out of the Air Force, so I just love tweaking him because I worked with a lot of Air Force guys and they're quite fun. But get back to the seriousness of the nature is the Democrats now, and it's actually named. It's called the wrap-up smear, and this whole tweeting thing back in 2016, all that was wrap-up smear. What's going on with Matt Gaetz is all wrap-up smear, and even Nancy Pelosi admitted it and called it by name. What they do is they come up with a smear, they leak it to the media, then the FBI gets a hold of it and said, "Oh, it must be true because there's an article about it." So they start an investigation. Well, I'm going to use Matt Gaetz as an example because they just brought information out. Was never verified, never proven, and the person that accused Matt Gaetz of improprieties is in jail for accusing someone else for improprieties. But when you ask somebody from the FBI about it, oh, we can't talk about an ongoing investigation. So it's kind of a circular argument where it comes out of Nancy Pelosi's office, leaked to the media. FBI looks and says, "Oh, well, there's an article about it. Must be true." And then they start the investigation, which that gets all the headlines is the investigation, even though there's absolutely zero evidence for it. And this happens so much. And now it's actually called by name. It's part of the psychology that the Democrats pay with the Republicans. And now we have a name for it. It's called a wrap-up smear. Don't buy into it. And it's just like the psychological aspect of this last election. There were very few of us saying, wait a minute, this is not even going to be close. I mean, Frank was pretty worried about this election. And I said a month before the election, it's not even going to be close. He's going to win all the Rust Belt states. He's going to win the swing states. And he's probably going to win the popular vote. And you can go back to look at some of the shows on Rumble and X. By the way, Rumble is TNCV and X is the NCV, THENCV, and also reasonablearguments.com. So the little shameful plug, but that's why media is no longer listened to. Right? I get a lot of my information from Benny Johnson, who's got his ear to he's right there at Mar-a-Lago a lot, and Dr. Steve Turley. Not that Steve Turley is on Fox News. There's another Dr. Steve Turley, and I get a lot of information from those guys. And what I'm doing is putting pieces together in my own mind and saying it here rather than listening to the lies on the mainstream media. And that's all it is. It's a psychological warfare against the American public. People are on it. And what's very, very important this time is you look at the Democrats or the demographics of the young black voters. Those people are going to be Republicans probably for the rest of their life, unless somebody screws up like what they're trying to do with in the Senate with Trump's nominees. If they stonewall or block those, that's how we lose. That's how we're going to lose voters. But anyway,
there was no question
that's
that
my rant.
There's no question that this election was trending towards Trump, and if it had been another week, we probably would have won those Senate seats and some more congressional seats. Even Democrats like Nate Silver and Nate Cohn, who I think run what they try to run a fair modeling. It's not really polling. It's kind of a modeling where they take, predictive polls and they, crunch their own numbers and apply their own algorithms to them to try to come up with it. And you know, even both, when you start looking at all these things across the spectrum, and they're like, oh, well, Trump is leading by half a point or 1 point, but the truth of the matter is they, like you said, George, even those modelers, and it's kind of like a batting average, right? Like once you have so many strikeouts, it's hard to move that batting average up without going 4 for 4. And, so you end up with this thing where, but they were moving about 0.2 points per week towards Trump, both of them. And you start looking at these other national polls, kept moving 0.2 to 0.5 points per week towards Trump. And so I was very encouraged going into election night that we were going to do very well, mostly because I had, I was privy to a couple of polls in both Wisconsin and Nevada that showed almost exactly what those races ended up being. And, they were showing, both of them were showing 2 to 3 points better than what the national polls were showing. And still, the thing is, all these pollsters, we're within the margin of victory. Outside of the one Iowa poll that was clearly done to be election interference and to motivate Democrats and to demotivate Republicans and tried to consume the news cycle for about 72 hours, which it did. And, so it's outside of that one poll. But the truth of the matter is that lady came up with a poll, 5 days before the election, and she didn't really have a trend line, and so she didn't have a trend line to go by. And so I guarantee you, if the trend line was, Harris is winning by 14 or 16 points or whatever ridiculous number it was in Iowa, 4 weeks earlier, Trump, she was winning by 20, and the trend was, 5 to 6 points towards Trump. And so that's where I always take these polls that come out of nowhere at the end, even if they're supposedly, trusted pollsters in the press. You have to kind of take them with a grain of salt if they haven't done 4 to 5 public polls over the course of the campaign.
Yeah, I usually go to the Washington Examiner. I find that they're the most accurate and so on. And they were in Trump's camp right along. They're cautious, because they keep looking at the entire picture. But they were predicting that Trump should win it at the time. And they have the best writers out there, conservative writers. And they have a tendency that if the Republicans screw up, they will say it. The Democrats screw up, they'll say it. They are conservative, but they will always give you a straight fact. And this is the type of thing I like to look at, and see it. It gives you the straight facts on it too. And I'll pick up anything with economics in it that saying it. The thing was with Trump, they weren't sure, I think, at some points. Sometimes he says things that, right now, with Panama Canal, I understand why he's saying what he's saying with the Panama Canal, because they're exorbitant charges and it's causing price problems, and it's going to be worse. So I understand with him. Why the other ones he's talking about, Greenland and that, I have no idea. However,
those are all negotiations. Those are all negotiation gambits. And with that, Frank, we're just about out of time here. Okay. So, Frank, why don't you take it out? Jamie, thank you very much for joining us again. There are two guests on this show that's been out here the most. You and Sheriff Hoffman. So I want to thank you publicly. And Frank, take us out.
Yeah, same thing. I want to thank you. You'll be back on again. There's the Jamie Miller report. Believe me, it's one of the best reports we've gotten. I want to thank you, and I want to wish you a happy new year. You and your family, and we'll have you back again. There's no 2 ways that's not going to happen. Okay.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, George. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. All right. Okay, to our people out there, we wish you a very happy and prosperous New Year. And pray for our country, pray to help our president, and God bless the United States of America.